So today, I will be talking a little bit about the socially vulnerable people in South Korea. The reason why I'm going to be talking about this is something that I've been working on for a few years now. I work on not only just South Korea, but I also work on Japan and I also work on Taiwan as well. I look at East Asia in comparison, and I look at socially vulnerable people. I look at social inclusion, social policies, and so I'm going to take a little bit of what I do and introduce you some of the things that I've been working on in the last couple of years. So just a really quick introduction of myself. My full name is actually Naomi Hyunjoo. I think I saw someone with the same name, so 반갑습니다. I'm a third generation Korean Canadian. My grandparents moved to Japan before the war, of course, and my parents were born and raised here, but they moved to Canada, and that's where I was born and raised. And I moved to Japan to do my actually postgraduate studies in 2000. And then I finished my degree, and I was very lucky to get a job here, and I've been working since 2006. I joined the Graduate School of Public Policy at Hokkaido University. That's where I work. I joined them in 2011. So I've been working at this institution for about 10 years. My research area, I work on gender, I work on migration and social inclusion in East Asia. When I say East Asia, as I said, it includes South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Today, I'm going to be looking at South Korea, the case of South Korea, because that was the request, because it's part of your Korean Studies days. And so I'm going to try to give you sort of a general overview of the socially vulnerable people, or what I call the underclass in South Korea. I will also try to highlight some of the problems and challenges that they face, and just some of my ideas that I have been thinking of in terms of how to resolve these challenges. So I will start the talk. Barbara also wanted me to explain what I do as a discipline. So I'm a political scientist by training. I did my poli-sci degree in University of British Columbia back home in Vancouver, and I moved to Japan, and I did my postgraduate studies at the Faculty of Law and Politics. So in Japan, many of the national universities, they have in the Department of Law, they also have political science as well. So that's where I did my degree, and now I work at the Graduate School of Public Policy. So as a political scientist, what I do is I look at these particular group of people, these socially vulnerable people, but I also look at policies. I look at social policies and how to design them so that it actually helps them. That's sort of the political scientist in me, looking at not just the phenomenon, but also looking at possible policies. What is working, what is not working. If it's not working, then why isn't it working? How can we revise the policy so that it will meet the challenges of these social vulnerable people? So that's the sort of political scientist in me. But I do also use very methods that sociologists use as well. I do a lot of field work. I do a lot of interviews. So I've been trained in political science, but of course the methodologies that I use come from various social sciences. So some of the photos that I will be showing you today, some of them I took personally when I was doing my field studies. It seems like ages ago that I actually traveled to Korea. It's been 2 years since the last time I traveled to anywhere, actually. So these photos are a little bit old. They're at least 2 years old, but that's what I do. I don't only just stay in my office and read and do my research in the office, but I also go outside of my office and go to the various places, South Korea, Taiwan. I've also traveled to Taiwan to do my field studies as well. So I'll share with you some of the things that I also learned from my field studies. So before I actually begin talking about the socially vulnerable people, I wanted to sort of start with sort of introducing you to some of these words that you may already know. But it's interesting how new words that are created in various societies, how it kind of represents or it expresses what's happening within. So for instance, in Korea, these are some of the sort of the new words now in the Korean vernacular. And I think it really expresses sort of the polarization and also the political mistrust that they have in South Korean society. For instance, 흑수저, it means basically dirt spoon. So, there's the English word called silver spoon. We use the same expression in Japan and also in Korea, but it means, those people who are born in wealthy families, or those people who don't have any trouble, finding food to eat, right? So we say, the English expression is born with a silver spoon. So it's sort of a metaphor. So born with a dirt spoon, that means that these people, some of these young people in Korea feel that they are they're not that they are born without any wealth, that they're born without any sort of connection. So in South Korean society is also known as society that has connections. So if your parents are well connected, then you might be able to land a job in some of the big corporations. So the word 흑수저, the word dirt spoon, expresses or means it sort of exemplifies these young people who feel like they're stuck, that they have nothing to look forward to, that they don't have anything, they don't have any wealth, and they're not well connected. Their parents aren't well connected. Things like this. Of course, the very well-known word "Joseon" basically means that the country that they're living in is not in a great state, right? So that's another word that expresses sort of the polarization of the South Korean society. The word also "철벽 사회" or "낭떠러지 사회" means 철벽 means like a cliff. 낭떠러지 also means cliff as well, but it means it expresses also again the South Korean society people are always on the verge of on the edge of the cliff. If you fall, then that's it, basically, that's sort of the end. That word also expresses sort of that polarization that they're experiencing or that they're seeing in South Korean society. The next word is actually kind of interesting. 노력 means to try, right? To try hard. But 노오력 means it's a play on words. So 노력, the word 노력 means to try hard. But if you they use that o, right? 노오력. The character in between o is to express the amount. So I've actually seen on Twitter, and I've also seen on social media that the young people use that 노오력, and they put o, the 오자, right? They put a lot of o between the two letters 노력, meaning that that's how much effort that they put in it. So I've seen Twitter. I've also seen on social media young people saying how much 노력 do I have to do to actually make it into the society. I thought that was actually quite interesting that they use that kind of expression. So that's another word also I think that expresses the polarization in South Korean society. The last one I have here is empo sedae, really meaning they have to let go of. So po means to let go, and it means infinity, like infinite. So it's the generation, it's the young generation, the Z generation, as we say. They feel that they have nothing to look forward for. So in the past, the older generation, people like myself, above 40, 50, it was about being successful in society meant you have a car, you have a car, a house, and something else, so that sort of meant that you actually succeeded in society. But the younger generation now, they think that, well, we don't have anything to look forward to. We're not making any money. The unemployment rate for young people in South Korea is actually quite high. So, a lot of people think, a lot of young people feel that they're not going to be able to get, land a good job in big corporations. So they have nothing to look forward to. They have to let go of everything, right? So that means that, there's no chance of them getting a house, buying a house, getting married, buying a car. So that's why they have to let go of these things. So it expresses this generation of young people that feel that they're stuck, that they have nothing to look forward to because they don't have the wealth, the connection to succeed in society. So these words, these are new words in Korean society, in Korean vernacular, which I feel that it really expresses this sort of polarization and political mistrust. I thought it's quite interesting. There's actually a set of these, same set of words in Japanese as well. It's also kind of interesting to compare, contrast these sort of new words. But I just wanted to start off with this, that there are these new words that young people use that expresses that sort of that feeling of not being able to achieve anything, their suffocation, the suffocation that they feel in Korean society, that polarization that they're experiencing in Korean society. Okay, so just the first few slides are just definitions. When I say social inclusion, of course, and also when I talk about socially vulnerable people, it is important to recognize, of course, that there's classes within the Korean society. In social terms, class can be defined as a large-scale grouping of people who share common economic resources, which strongly influence the type of lifestyle they're able to lead. This is definition from Anthony Giddens. The typology of class has diversified, I think, in recent years. We can argue that main type of classes in society today are the upper class, the working class, that includes middle to lower class, and the underclass. Now, I will also give you a working definition of what an underclass is. So who are they? Who are the underclass? So the first time that this word was used was back in the 1960s by an American sociologist. At that time, the word was described as those who are unemployed. So people who are unemployed back in the 1960s in America, in the United States, they were also called the underclass. Now, this, of course, definition has evolved. In the 1980s, an American journalist used this term, and he defined it as such. He defined it as a group of people living in poverty who are not included in society due to the dependency on state benefits, denial of work ethics, failed morality, and rejection of family norms. In the 1990s, again, an American sociologist also added to this definition, the definition, and he said, he defined it as those who are not involved in production work or excluded from the labor market system. The young and the homeless may also be referred to as the underclass. And in recent years, some have also included low-skilled migrant workers that are dependent on state welfare into this category. One of the common features of underclass is that they are unable to escape from poverty. For example, the passive poor, who are long-term welfare recipients, they find it very hard to escape from that situation. Also, poor youth or migrant workers who are dependent on precarious work, they also find it very difficult to escape from that cycle. Sometimes they're involved in underground economic activities, such as the sex industry or in crime, or those who have been traumatized. For instance, those people who are homeless, or if they have problems with substance abuse, or if they have some kind of mental illness or psychological mental health issues. They find it very difficult to escape that vicious cycle. For instance, if you have a certain chronic illness, it could be a physical illness or it can be, a mental health issue, but it becomes very difficult to find a full-time job, because sometimes when you have certain chronic illness, or if you have some mental health issues, it becomes very difficult to have a regular schedule. So oftentimes they opt to not have a full-time job but a part-time job. If you're a part-time job, or if you have a part-time job, or if you're an irregular worker, of course, your wage is not going to be as high as a full-time worker. And so then it becomes difficult to pay your expenses. And then if, for instance, if the illness becomes worse, then maybe you have to leave the job. If you leave the job, then obviously you don't have the income. Then you have that danger of becoming homeless. So that's one of the common features I want to emphasize, is that they're unable to escape from that vicious cycle, that they're not able to leave that cycle, and so that's why they are stuck in that situation. The word underclass itself was defined. The first time it was used, it was in the West, in the United States. But the problem of underclass is no longer a unique a phenomenon to the West. But we've witnessed in recent years the same phenomenon happening here in East Asia. I'm sure all of you know that people have talked about the collapse of the middle class in East Asia. So there's sort of this massive polarization in East Asian society as well. There some of the features includes increase in youth poverty, also the working poor. That phenomenon of working poor is also very relevant, very prevalent here in Japan and also in Korea. Bipolarization of class. So you have sort of the upper class and then the working class, and of course the working class, more and more people feel that they are no longer middle class, but they're sort of moving down, moving lower into the lower class. Also the issue of low skilled foreign migrant workers. This is an issue in South Korea as well as in Japan. There are also so these are the features that you see in East Asia. You can see that the issue of underclass or socially vulnerable people are becoming more serious here in East Asia as well. In Japan, we have issues with part-time or irregular workers. For instance, 80% of women who work in Japan work irregular. They're part-timers. They work in irregular work. In Japan and Korea, both you have issues with low-skilled migrant workers. Also in Taiwan, also this is true for Taiwan as well. In China, I'm not an expert in China, but you see this rural-urban gap, and you see this sort of urban underclass in China. So you see that the phenomenon of underclass is prevalent in many of these East Asian societies. Okay, so I want to now specifically look at what is happening in South Korea. So there's one thing that I wanted to make clear before I talk about the situation in Korea. So relative poverty rate, I'm going to be talking about this in the next few slides. What is relative poverty rate? The way we calculate relative poverty rate is this is different than absolute poverty rate. But the it's a relative indicator for the ratio of people with smaller than half of the median of the disposable income. So you take, for instance, all the income in South Korea, and you take the average, right? You take the median. Those people who live under that median, we call them we say that they are living in relative poverty rate. So please understand that relative poverty rate is different from absolute poverty rate. Now, just to give you some numbers, homeless people in South Korea, there's approximately about 11,340. This is from the Ministry of Health and Welfare in South Korea. These are the numbers from 2020, and about 11,000 people are homeless in South Korea. Now, out of these 11,000 people, about 6,000 of them live, about half, right? Half of them live in what is called a chokbang. Chok means, chogak, it means, very tiny, right? So these sort of cubicle homes that are around Seoul. There's also some in the rural areas, but out of the 6,000 people that live in these small cubicle homes, 3,000 of them are in Seoul. Now, for those of you who have been to Korea or who watch Korean movies or watch Korean drama, what is your image of Gangnam? Like Gangnam style, it's a now that song is quite old, but Gangnam style, the word Gangnam, or the district of Gangnam, for those of you who are familiar with the area, for those of you who enjoy watching Korean movies or drama, I'm sure that area has come out in many of these dramas. What is your image of Gangnam? Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you can write something on chat, that's great. Yes, wealthy area. Thank you very much. That was the answer that I was looking for. Yes, it's a very affluent area. Yeah. So when you go to Gangnam, you see these skyscrapers, and you see these tower mansions and high-end shops, as one of the one person had written just now on chat. That's the image you have in Gangnam. Yeah. But the photos. So this is the photo of the chokbangs that I visit when I go to Seoul. Now, this is the aerial view. This is actually in Gangnam. It's a very different Gangnam than the Gangnam you probably all know. So it's right actually next to the railroad tracks. So there is the KTX, the bullet train in Korea. There's a railroad track that actually goes goes through Gangnam, and this is right next to the railroad track. So of course the high end, the tower mansions, they don't build them right next to the railway station, yeah, because of the sound and of course because of it makes a lot of sound and it's very noisy. Also, you can feel that sort of shattering of buildings. That's why they don't make them. They don't make those very luxurious apartments, mansions next to railroad track. So what happens is, of course, there's sort of this like empty spaces right next to places like the railroad track, where people then find that space to build these temporary homes, these cubicle homes. And so this is right, this is right in Gangnam, and you'll see that maybe the photo is not too clear, but if you look at the aerial view, you can see that obviously it's not like those luxurious mansions that you see in Gangnam. It's basically made out of 2x4s, and it's a tin by the roofs are made of tin. It's if you go inside of these cubicle homes, the walls are falling apart. There's cracks. In Seoul can get very cold in the winter. It can get to -10, -12. It's really, really cold in the winter, and it gets really, really hot in the summer because there's no air conditioner inside. So it's the bare minimum. It's like it's living in below standard livelihood. So these are some of the houses. These cubicle homes are houses where a lot of the socially vulnerable people live. Now, the relative poverty rate in Korea, as of 2019, this is the numbers from OECD, is about 16.7%, so about 17%. Now, what is shocking is this is the relative poverty rate, the average, right? If you take the relative poverty rate of elderly people over the age of 65 and over, is 43%. Almost 1 in 2 elderly person in South Korea live under relative poverty. So the next set of photos that I want to show you is this is inside the cubicle homes, these jokbangs. So most of them are very, very tiny. Sometimes you can find rooms that are just a little bit larger, where people can actually put stuff in. But the average size is about 6.6 meters, square meters. It's very, very tiny. Of course, you're not going to find a shower inside these cubicle homes. But at best, you will have a faucet, right? So basically, these people that live in these cubicle homes, they buy so those hoses from DIY shops, and they put it, they connect it to their faucet, and then they take a shower. It's okay in the summer, because and there's no hot water, by the way. So it's cold water. You turn on the faucet, it's just cold water. So in the winter, some of the better situation is sometimes they would go to the local moyeokjang, the public bath. But some people opt to boil water, at home, at home, and then they mix it with the cold water from the faucet, and that's how they take a shower. This is not 30 years ago or 40 years ago in Seoul. This is now. This is, 2 years ago when I was there. So it's not something that happened in the past. It's happening right now. So that at best that is the that is the bathroom, the shower. If you look at the photos from on the right hand side here, these are the actual rooms, and if you can, it might not be too clear from where you are, but again, because it's so small, 6.6 square meters is not a very big area. So basically, they have to place all their stuff, the stuff that they own, within this, this cubicle. And you can see the gentleman who here on the photo here, he has basically he has his place to sleep, his futon, his ibur, and then right next to it he has these the stove. No, it's gas. It's not a proper sort of stove, but he has these sort of what do you call these? The temporary ones, where you use the cassette. So that's how they cook inside their home. And again, the other two photos also, you can see clearly that obviously there's not much space. At best, they have maybe some might have a small refrigerator. One of the better, I should say, better rooms that I saw, there was a woman who was in her 70s who actually had a what is a kitchen? I mean, some places don't even have a kitchen, but there was a room where she had a very tiny kitchen where she could cook. But these are sort of the average sort of chokbangs. As I said, the relative poverty rate of those people over 65 is 43%. And so many of these chokbangs, if you go inside, if you take a look at who are the people that are living in these cubicle homes, most of them are elderly people. Okay. This is Myeongdong. This is actually the picture of these two photos are a picture of Myeongdong. Now, this is a little bit older. These photos are from 2017. In the last 50 years, this is the report by the Bank of Korea. The price of rice has increased 50 times, gasoline about 77 times, price of land, has increased 3,000 times. To buy anything, to buy a property in South Korea, to buy a house, to buy a mansion, to buy an apartment is, basically with just if you're just an average worker, it's very, very difficult to buy a place in South Korea. It's very, very expensive. This is one of the problems that the current administration faces. The housing prices are just skyrocketing. And this was basically back in 2017 when I was in Myeongdong doing some field work. There were these young students, young workers and young students that were demonstrating against this, the increase of these land prices and housing. Back in 2017, minimum wage was about 6,400 Korean won. Now it's up to 9,000. So in the last 5 years, minimum wage has increased. But back in 2017, it was about 6,470 Korean won. Now, at that time in 2017, the most expensive piece of land was in Myeongdong. Even still today, it's right in the middle of Myeongdong, and 3.3 square meters. In Korea, they use this word pyeong, 1 pyeong, 2 pyeong. And 1 pyeong is about 3.3 square meters. We also use the same sort of size in Japan as well, but it's approximately about 3.3 meters squared. And the price of a land, 3.3 square meters of land in Myeongdong at that time in 2017 was 15 years worth of minimum wage, working every day. So this the demonstration was actually quite interesting because each sort of flag, or the piece of cloth that they were holding meant something. So at the time, minimum wage was 6,470 Korean won. If you worked 8 hours, right, for 5,467 days, without that equals 15 years without actually taking any day off. It equals so 200 million, 8,300 Korean won. And that was the price of that 1 pyeong, 3.3 square meters of land in Myeongdong in 2017. So they were demonstrating that the land prices are way too high. This also this is a photo that I took. This is actually from a news source, Oma News. And this was also this similar kind of demonstration in Myeongdong. So this one particular young woman she's lying on this piece of cloth, and this piece of cloth is actually 3.3 square meters, right? So that piece of land that she's demarcated with this small cloth, that that cost at the time 15 years worth of minimum wage. So that's, you can see how expensive that. So the idea was that these young workers, these young students, were demonstrating that land prices were too high, housing was way too expensive, that they will never be able to afford anything if land prices stayed at around the at that same rate. So I always, when I go to Korea, I always am so amazed at sort of these new ways young people demonstrate. They're trying to raise their voice about these social problems. I thought it was quite ingenious, the way they were demonstrating about this land prices. Okay, there's also a different type of cubicle rooms, and these are particularly more popular with young people and irregular workers, and it's called Kutiwan. Now, originally Kutiwan was actually these small rooms where students came from the rural area to when they came, and then they would take the exam for become a public servant. And so so they would come from the rural area to Seoul, and they would study for the public servant exam, and that's why it was called Koshiwan. And now it's become more of a sort of a temporary housing for young people or irregular workers who can't afford a proper home. Now, the cost of rent of these Koshiwon is about 300,000 to 400,000 Korean won. So it's about approximately $300 US. So of course, it's one of the cheapest places to live in Seoul. But of course, again, these are very tiny cubicle homes. It's usually just a room, right? You have a shared bathroom, shared shower, shared kitchen, and basically it's just a place for you to sleep, and there's a small desk where you can do some work. There's no place to hang your washing. So there was actually a very unfortunate accident a couple of years ago where there was one of these Koshiwons caught on fire, and the people living in that floor where that fire had happened, they couldn't escape because the fire exit was blocked by stuff, because there's no other place to put it. So if you can see the photo on the left hand side, you see all this, people with their they've hung their washing here, but this is sort of what it looks like inside. There's just one person has quite a bit of stuff, right? I mean, you have your clothing, you have your books. If you're a student, you have books, and so, but these small houses are not enough to obviously put stuff inside, and there has been quite a few unfortunate cases where there was fire, or there was something wrong with the building, and they're not these buildings, these Koshion buildings, are not built to stay, right? It's a temporary housing, right? And so they've had had all sorts of issues with them, not abiding by proper building laws and whatnot. But they're quite popular, as I say, with the young people and irregular workers, because the rent is quite cheap. Now, I've been told from Barbara that I have 2 more minutes. I'll finish in another minute or two. So and the last thing I want to talk about was children's poverty. Now, children's poverty in South Korea is also a very serious issue. About 10% of children in South Korea live in poverty. In relative poverty. And if you look at the relative poverty rate of single parent household, almost 50% of usually it's single mothers, but the relative poverty rate of single parent household is almost 50% in South Korea. Now, what I wanted to say was that, this is my last slide. So the situation in South Korea, it's that the challenges that socially vulnerable people face, and this is true also in Japan as well, is that they're not able to access social resources. They have very low wages, and they're not able to secure housing because just prices of property are so high, because the unemployment rate for young people as well as elderly people is also quite high. One thing that I want to emphasize is that homelessness is not a special situation. Anybody can become homeless, right? The thing that I mentioned in the beginning, that poverty is self-perpetuating. This is the problem. So as you can see, the single parent household, the poverty rate is quite high. Elderly people also, their poverty rate is very high. And then what happens with the children, of course, living with if you're a child living with a single parent, that sort of poverty is self-perpetuating. One of the reasons I think that this is happening is because of the negative and serious impact of the fallacies of capitalism, the myth of the endless economic growth. There is no such thing as endless economic growth, and also neoliberal policies. Now, last thing I want to say is that there is this idea of self-responsibility. Now, the reason why you are in poverty is because it's your own fault. That's sort of the logic behind it, behind what people, not only in South Korea, but also here in Japan as well. People blame themselves. So people who are who live in poverty, oftentimes they blame themselves. Also, society blames them. You must be living in this situation. You must be homeless because it's something you did wrong. Of course, that's not true, but that sense of self-responsibility is really, really strong, I think, in South Korea and Japan. What we need to do is that we need to reintegrate, or we need to include these vulnerable people back into society. As I said in the beginning, the society in Japan and Korea, it's very much, the blame is on the individual, the idea of self-responsibility, and also sort of the idea that, it's a sort of, a society on edge, right, on the edge of the cliff. If you make a mistake, there is no second chance. That's one of the problems that I see here in Japan and also in South Korea. Sorry, I don't have enough time to elaborate on more, but this is again the situation that's happening now. I'm not talking about something that it's in the past.